What's going on, everybody? These Monday videos are great because one of the things that I've tried really hard to do is for this channel to be a place where you're not just listening to me, but we're all sharing ideas, and it's not like my opinion is right and yours is wrong or vice versa. There is no power hierarchy here. Everybody is an equal and everybody has a voice. And this thing about these Monday videos is I try to share a variety of opinions and sides and then kind of analyze and talk about the arguments for and against each. And I kind of feel like a moderator. And so a lot of the time on these Monday videos, I don't really get too heavy into my thoughts. In this particular video, I am going to, toward the middle end-ish, I'm going to kind of go into detail more on what I think about this particular topic of population control. Is PSA actually doing population control? You know, there were people that said absolutely no. There were people that said absolutely yes. There were people that said a lot of stuff in between. And then there were some comments about pop control that didn't really fit a yes or a no per se, but were definitely worthy of hearing. And I'm going to share a few of all of these. You know, I don't think that in hearing the opinions and hearing the stories and hearing the thoughts of anybody that we're going to come out with a clear yes or a clear no answer. And I don't even know if there is a clear yes or a clear no answer. But to me, you know, I love cards and I love talking about cards and I love talking about topics. And I know a lot of people like, I'm so tired of talking about grading companies. Who cares? I think it matters. I think it really matters when the difference between a card and a 7 and an 8 could be thousands of dollars. Then what those companies are doing is kind of important, even if the card doesn't change. If the same card gets a 7 versus the same card gets an 8, if the value of that card changes dramatically, that is a lot of power that is being handed to these third parties. And I think it's important to kind of continue to analyze them and watch what they're doing and talk about what they're doing. Try to hold them accountable, create awareness. And it doesn't mean that the grading companies are a sham. And some people think they are and some people they aren't. But that's not the discussion today. The discussion today is, do they have pop control? So what even is pop control? Pop control is basically saying they're going to use standards for certain cards that they don't use for other cards because they're trying to limit the number of cards of that card in a grade. As an example, the Rickey Henderson rookie, the Topps Rickey Henderson rookie is a really cool and iconic card. And in an 8, that card is $230. In a 9, that card is a couple of $1,000. In a 10, tens of thousands of dollars. So if a really nice one shows up, maybe even a 10 quality one shows up, a gem mint one comes up, are they slow to give it a 10? Are they saying, nope, going to be a 9, even if it deserves a 10? That's basically pop control. And by doing that, is it protecting the ones that do have the 10? Now, lots of great thoughts. Enough from me. Let's hear from you. The first group that we're going to hear from, the first comments, were the people said, no, I don't think there's pop control. Let's see what they had to say. The first category is no, there's no pop control going on. This first comment says, I feel pop control would take too much time for the grading company. It seems grading a card is treated like a production line in most cases. Just push them through as fast as possible. It would also take knowledgeable graders, a grader that recognizes the card that needs to be pop controlled, or an alert of some sort from the database or a higher up that a card needs extra attention or manipulation. I don't know if that would happen with most 70s to modern cards. Perhaps I don't have a good grasp on the production line at PSA, though. And another comment says, great video and great message, Greg. I don't really buy into the pop control conspiracy, as it seems like it would have to be much too widespread to have any real financial gain for graders, and there would be too much to lose for PSA if it were discovered to be true. Possible, but not likely. Cheers. All right, some great points there. Now, where do we all fall? What do we think of that? Now, let's just kind of talk about what was just mentioned. First, if there's pop control, wouldn't that really slow things down? You know, if somebody has to check a database and go, oh, this is one of the cards that I can't give a 10 to, and every time a card comes across the desk, they've got to go, well, is this card one of the restricted cards, or is this not one of the restricted cards? I mean, that would definitely slow things down. I mean, the reason we hear that we don't get graders notes and the reason we don't get explanations for the grades that we do get is because that would slow things down. Well, imagine if every single card had to be checked to see if it was a card that was protected. So I think that's a good argument as to why they're probably not doing pop control. And you say, well, everybody knows a 1980 Rickey Henderson and a 10 is worth a fortune. Everybody knows that a Ken Griffey Jr. upper deck is worth $2,000 in a 10, but $200 in a 9. So same with a Jordan, you know, tens of thousands versus several thousand. And I would say, well, do all the graders know that? I don't know. Is there a quick database? I don't know. Would that slow things down? Yeah, it probably would slow things down. I thought that was a good point. You know, another issue with it is in the second comment, it says, imagine what they would have to lose. Imagine the credibility loss, because isn't a judge really, isn't their credibility really everything? If they lose their credibility, aren't they done? Isn't a person done if they're supposed to be this independent, giving their independent opinion, and then all of a sudden, it's no longer, we find out it's not an independent opinion, it's an opinion that's being controlled based on certain factors? And, I mean, if some memo got leaked, if some email got leaked, if some audio message at a meeting was recorded and leaked, that they had pop control, that they were telling graders not to grade certain cards 10s, that no longer would 10s happen, wouldn't that be the end of the company? Isn't that, I mean, PSA Collectors is a big company worth millions of dollars. Wouldn't they, if that came out, if that was leaked, wouldn't it be over at that moment for them? I mean, it might not. So I think these are good arguments. Is it would take way more time, which would cost way more money just to prevent more of these cards getting gems. You know, the 93 Jeter SP, for example. And if they were doing that, and we found out they were doing that, and someone blew the whistle, PSA's done, aren't they? It's kind of hard to argue with those arguments because there is a lot to lose. Now, Greg, are you saying, no, again, what I'm doing right now is I'm moderating. I am just analyzing the arguments that you all are making. I'm not giving my opinion yet, and I'm going to kind of give my opinion here in a few minutes as we go. But those are strong arguments. And there might be counters to those arguments, but those are strong arguments. That said, several people said, yes, there is definitely pop control. There is definitely pop control going on. So let's hear from some of those. Now, while some people said no, some said yes, there's pop control. This first comment. Great video, Greg. I definitely think they use pop control on certain cards. 1980 Henderson, 89 Upper Deck Griffey, 86 Jordan, just to name a few. They do it to protect the mystique and value. If too many 10s get out there, it might devalue the overall idea of what they want PSA 10s to be. This is coming from a guy who grades with them regularly and will continue to do so. It's all part of the game. Another comment says, yes, PSA does pop control. Why? Why wouldn't they? I've seen ultra-modern cards with white corners, chipped edges, and noticeable centering issues receive a 10 from PSA. But the Upper Deck Griffey, Topps Ricky Henderson, 93 Jeter, and more iconic modernish cards have gem rates that just don't make sense mathematically. It's like the fine-tooth comb comes out for those types of cards. Meanwhile, a 2019 Prism PJ Washington rookie card gets a 5-second look and then goes off and goes to the gem town. And finally, pop control, yes, it's possible for pre-war. For vintage, for modern, for ultra-modern, but as long as we're submitting cards to PSA, buying and selling cards that are graded by PSA, they basically do what they want to do. I would love to be able to disassociate from grades. Authentication is necessary, but this is what the hobby has become, paying thousands of dollars for commons and minor stars because of a PSA 10 distinction. Fortunately or unfortunately, I am not playing in the same ballpark with the big boys, and thus the big boy cards elude me. But not all hope is lost. There are still some really good quality cards that won't put me in jeopardy with a bookie. The hobby does not need to be expensive, but maybe I should call Saul just in case. All right, so there are some more comments. I mean, if there are tons and tons and tons of Ricky Henderson rookie cards out there, like thousands of them, then how come 10s aren't popping up all the time? How come if there are lots of them and more are being submitted every month, how come none of them are getting 10s, or basically none of them are getting 10s? If they're not controlling the population, if there are a ton of Jordan rookies in 9s that are probably getting cracked and resubmitted, and they've said multiple times that, hey, you know, a car, I mean, we've seen it. People submit cracked 9s and get 10s all the time. Why is it not really happening with Jordans? I mean, these are decent arguments too. If they start handing out 10s easy, or if they start handing out 10s at all, you know who the most upset people are going to be? The people who have a 10 and spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on 10s. So those people definitely don't want there to be another 10, right? Anything that's, you know, not common and you spend a lot of money on, if all of a sudden more of it shows up, then it makes your thing less valuable. You know, if the supply of anything goes up, then the value of that item goes down. Does that mean, though, that they are controlling populations? Does that mean, though, that when an 89 Upper Deck comes in, that's a Ken Griffey Jr., that it gets looked at differently? And what even is the definition of pop control? I mean, I said earlier, well, pop control is basically the idea that they're grading cards harder on these certain cards because they're iconic cards and they don't want more of them to be high grade. But but is that actually pop control? Because I actually think what is happening, I actually think that the what feels like pop control might just be something a little bit different. And that's the next category of answers, and I should say responses, that I want to actually talk about here. A lot of people mentioned some things as their opinion on this topic of pop control, and the opinions that they gave or questions that they raised, I think it's kind of more complicated than yes, there's pop control, or no, there's not. Do I, Greg, think that the people at PSA in the grading room have a list of cards, and when those cards come across their desk, they just dock it a grade? They say, okay, so it's not a 10, it's starting with a 9, and where do we go down from there? I don't personally think that they're doing that. I don't think PSA is taking a perfect card and not even considering it for a 10 because they don't want more 10s. Now, does that mean I'm right? No, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. But I don't think that's happening. Again, the amount that they have to lose if they were doing that would be bad. The amount of extra time that would take to have to be screening cards from the allowing 10s, not allowing 10s list seems extreme. Have I ever gotten a 10 on a card? I have. I've gotten multiple 10s on cards from PSA. Were any of them monster cards? No. Were any of them pop 110s? Actually, yeah. So I think it's more complicated than either yes, there's pop control, or no, there's not. So let's kind of take a look at some of the responses from all of you that were along those lines of, I don't know if it's quite that simple, and I don't know if it's pop control meaning no, we don't have any more Rickey Henderson 10s, because I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's a forbidden list up on the wall at PSA. But there might be some things that are happening that kind of are along those lines. Let's take a look at some of those responses. There were some other comments, and when it comes to pop control, maybe it's just complicated. This first one from my friend Orlando of A Collector's Dream. Another great video, Greg. As far as pop control, when I went to card grading school, we were told that any card we grade a 10 would be reviewed by 1 or 2 senior graders. It's possible that senior graders are hesitant to give certain cards a 10. My dad says, I don't know if PSA for sure is trying to control the population, but it seems I recall hearing the guy running the company saying that they scrutinize more the premier cards of the hobby. Isn't that population control? Why would they scrutinize some cards more than others? A card should be graded for its perfection by their standards rather than who is on the card. Another comment says, Greg, I specifically remember one of the higher-ups at PSA doing an interview during the 2023 National. He was asked if they grade iconic cards differently. He said, I'm paraphrasing, but he used George Brett's rookie as an example. Well, if 1975 Topps George Brett comes in to be graded, obviously we are going to treat that card differently than a common. I still can't believe he came out and admitted what we have all been saying. And another comment says, to answer your question, yes and no. The numbers suggest that pop control exists at PSA. I work with numbers and statistics, and the general rule is, if it looks like there's a trend, there's probably a trend. On the other hand, I don't think it happens with all cards. Not sure how the ones that get scrutinized more are chosen. It could be an anomaly. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about grading. At this point, my very best cards are not graded, and I don't plan to change that. Of the grading companies, I think I trust PSA the least. I have not had a great experience when I have graded with them overall. I guess that makes me cynical of them. That probably taints my opinion in answering this question. Thanks for all of your videos. And another comment says, I've received PSA 10s on some low pop cards, like a 1988 Fleer Rodman, that has 252 10s out of 10,877 graded. I don't think pop control is the reason, but I do think they grade some cards differently. If a PSA grader gives a 1984 Fleer Update Dusty Baker a PSA 10, they most likely will just slab it up. If a grader thinks a 1984 Fleer Update Roger Clemens is a PSA 10, then another grader will look it over, and maybe a head grader will give a third opinion. If PSA gives a big card a 10, it will be scrutinized by more people and would give PSA negative optics if they overgraded the card. Okay, so there were two main arguments here of, well, pop control, kind of what's your definition of pop control? So maybe, but I do think this. And here are those two things. The first thing that came out that was mentioned was from my buddy Orlando of A Collector's Dream. And what Orlando said was he went to grading school. He went through a program to learn how to grade cards. And what they said, what they told him, and it was for CGC, I believe. And what they told him was, if you give a card a 10, it's going to be reviewed. If you don't give it a 10, then I guess it wouldn't be reviewed. So if you're a grader and you're saying, man, somebody's going to check my work if I give a card a 10, but if I don't give it a 10, nobody's going to check my work. Now just put yourself in an employee's shoes, okay? I mean, you're at work, wherever it is that you work. I'm a teacher. Okay, so I'm a teacher, and they say, Greg, if you don't give any Fs to any of your students, we're not going to come observe you this year. We're just going to say, oh, he's doing great. People aren't failing. But Greg, if you give an F, we're going to come and observe you a few times to see if there are some areas of things that you're not doing that you could do better to make sure that you don't have any Fs. Is that going to sway me? Is that going to encourage me, Greg, to not want to give an F? I mean, a teacher who gives a grade on an assignment, to a certain extent, is sort of, well, we are graders. It's not a card, but it's an assignment. And sometimes it's right or wrong, and sometimes it's kind of gray. And cards are kind of gray. English teachers kind of have a tough job times with grading an essay. I mean, one teacher could grade an essay a C and another could give it an A, right? So if the grading companies are having a second set of eyes or a third set of eyes, look at a card because that card got a 10, that seems like it's encouraging the grader to not give it a 10 because they don't have their work checked and be told that they were wrong and they screwed up. No, what are you doing? Now, I will say this. I had a card that I submitted, oh man, probably 3-4 years ago to PSA. And there used to be this back door to see your grades before your grades were available. And I found it off of a YouTube video, and they've closed that now, so it doesn't work anymore. But what happened was you could take your set registry, if you had a set registry, and you could add a cert number. And card's certification number would show up in the set registry grade before the grade popped. So if I'll give you, here's an actual example. So I had a Larry Bird card, one of the Larry Bird rookie cards. He has several from the 1980 set. And I sent it in for grading, and I went in and I made a fake Larry Bird set registry because a couple of days prior, my grades show up there. So I put in the cert number and the card showed up as an 8. And I was like, okay, cool. I thought it was an 8. It got an 8. Awesome. It felt like 2 years. 2 days later, when I actually had my grade pop, it got a 6. So somewhere between, in the quality control process, somebody took it from an 8 to a 6. Now, how anybody gave this card a 6 is crazy to me. I mean, I thought it was at least an 8. And at one point it had an 8. So what that told me was it's not just 10s that are having a second set of eyes. At some point, somebody else is getting involved and maybe changing the grade. So I think that's a good thing, right? That if all cards have a second set of eyes, because this one went from an 8 to a 6. So it sounds like it's not just 10s that have a second set of eyes. Now, there were a couple of comments in there. One was from my dad, and one was the comment right afterwards that said, I thought I remember the PSA president talking about that high-end cards get graded more strictly. And where did I hear that? Well, you hear it here, because I did a video about that video, that interview that the PSA president did, Ryan Hogue. And here's that clip. Take a look.
The other one about pop control, yeah, there is no pop control going on. This is a fun thing. Yeah, there's a fun thing to look at. But, I mean, look, if it's a big card, though, like, if you're submitting a 75 Topps George Brett and you think you're going to get a 10, that card, like, we want to make sure it's really a 10. There is no, like, conspiracy to, like, suppress it for all the other 10 owners to preserve their value. We just want to make sure if we're going to 10 it, it's got to be great. It's got to be a great card. So, yeah, like the big cards get looked at, closely, and we want to feel really confident with that grade. There is no, mindful population control. I would argue that, most of the graders have no idea what the population is on these things, but they know what a big card is and a meaningful card, and they want to make sure it's representative of the PSA standards.
Okay, so that was pretty clear. He very clear. The president, the head of PSA, said with his own words on their own Instagram channel, yeah, if you've got a big card that everyone in the hobby knows is a big card, like a George Brett rookie card, and we think it might be a 10, we're going to look it over really, really closely because we don't want to give it a 10 if it shouldn't have gotten a 10. Now, is that pop control? I mean, part of me thinks, well, that's kind of pop control if the big cards, like the Jordan rookie, that the grader thinks is a 10, you're now going to try to find other graders to see if it's not a 10. That means that the grading process is different, right? It's different for the bigger cards in the hobby. And if it's different, and this different being more strict, meaning there are additional layers to big cards, that's at least a form of pop control, right? So what do I think? Do I think that they're never going to give a Jordan a 10, they're never going to give a Ricky Henderson a 10, they're never going to give a Derek Jeter SP a 10? No, I think they'll give them 10s, but I think they are absolutely going to be 100% sure on those cards. And like the other comments said, like several of the comments said, it's just kind of not a huge card, and it's a 10, it's not as big of a deal. And some of us, myself included, are kind of like, well, that's crazy. But at the same time, I do kind of understand that. I'm trying to think of an analogy that would work, but, say you're a construction company. All right, so say you run a construction company, and there's a fence that blows down in the wind. And part of the reason I'm thinking that is because it's really windy outside here and it's stormy outside here. And outside the window behind the camera is my fence that I built a couple years ago with my next door neighbor. So if that fence blows down, and it's just, 80 feet of fence, no big deal. And I call them, I say, hey, I need a new fence. And they come out there and they check and they go, they're going to say, it's going to be $2,300. They're probably not going to put a ton of thought into it because, if they're off by $50 or $100, it's not a big deal. It's just a $2,000, $2,500 fence. But if I submitted blueprints for a 7,500 square foot house on a private lot in the country, they're going to spend more than 10 minutes looking over it to give it my quote. And I know people are saying, those aren't the same thing. They're not the same thing. But the liability of being off by 5% on the fence versus being off by 5% on the 7,500 square foot house is a big difference. And the liability of giving a Fleer Jordan a 10 instead of a 9 and giving a Byron Scott a 10 instead of a 9, it's a substantial difference in liability. So part of me understands if they have a PSA guarantee, right? If they have a PSA guarantee and they're saying, hey, we guarantee the card, we guarantee the grade, money back guarantee, then and the card is valued at $100,000 instead of $100, then they probably want to make sure that they're right for sure because of their liability. If a doctor is doing a surgery on me, or the doctor is doing the surgery on the President of the United States, I think they're going to get the best doctor. They're going to have assistant doctors waiting on the standby. I think they're going to have other people there assisting. If it's the president, even though it's the same surgery, than if it's just Greg. Because if something goes wrong and it's the president, or something goes by and it's just Greg, it seems like that would be different for them. Does that make it right? I don't think it makes it right. I don't think it makes it right, but I do understand it. Now, Greg, are you becoming an apologist for PSA now? Are you defending PSA? No, because I do think every card should be graded the same, and every card should go through the exact same process, and it shouldn't matter if it's a Ricky Henderson rookie or it's a, Mike Scott tops. I don't think that it should be different, but I understand why it is different. And is that a form of pop control? Probably. Probably is. But it's also, we have to understand there's liability involved. And the liability is expensive for them. I don't know. What do you guys think? It's not cut and dry. I understand both sides. I understand, yes, pop control, no pop control. What do I think, Greg? I think there's at least some pop control by having it have more layers for the expensive card. Is that wrong? It does feel wrong because it would make it harder to get the 10. But I also kind of understand it. I kind of understand it because if they make a mistake on the Jordan, or they make a mistake on the Byron Scott, it's a pretty big difference in the liability that they're exposing themselves to. So, I don't know. I don't know what I think. If I was in PSA's, and I guess that's the thing. If you were in PSA's shoes, what would you do? We just go, oh yeah, the new kid that we just got with the spiky hair, you know? Why does it matter what his hair is? I don't know. I'm just talking. But the new kid who just rolled in happens to have a Jordan roll across his desk. But Walt, who's been in the back corner at the same grading desk, good old Walt, who's been there for years, he happens today to get the Byron Scott instead. You don't think you should have Walt take a look at it? If you're running PSA, shouldn't Walt get called over to help Hunter with the spiky hair? I kind of understand. I'm not on their side, but I kind of understand. Now, there were some other comments that were mentioned that I think are really good comments that I also wanted to share. So let's take a look at some of those. There were a few other thoughts that didn't fit in a category, but I thought were worthy of mentioning. This one says, pop control, I guess it's possible. The bigger concern I have is a big spender submitting a bunch of cards, and to please them, they get some high grades in there, even if not deserving. Another point, anyone ever wonder if your higher grade cards are getting swapped when they get to PSA? And my friend Don says, Greg, it was so cool to see the wants and diversity of the community. You share everyone's thoughts so well. As for the question on pop control, yes, I absolutely believe that is happening. I believe it was much worse in the past. Does a leopard change its spots? No. But it can slowly evolve, still maintaining its camouflage. I think there is a degree of politics also. Here are two examples of my reasoning. Number one, at the National in '94, I wanted to make a trade on high-quality vintage football. I had 2 autogram rookies. I was going to trade one. I took them to a lot of vintage dealers for their opinions, i.e. Kit Young, Mr. Mint, Joe Corbello, and 4 or 5 others. They all agreed with me on the nicer of the 2. I traded the other one to a big dealer. Then, within an hour, that dealer had it graded and in his showcase in a PSA 7. I had to wait a day to pick mine up, and it was a PSA 5. Big submitter versus small guy? Number 2, I had a good friend that's been a vintage dealer and have known him for well over 30 years. SGC used to call him in and help them identify or help authenticate cards in the old days. He told me while he was there, the CEO told graders if anything was going to grade a 10, it had to come over his desk first. I'm only sharing what I have experienced and have heard from a very trustworthy hobby friend. If I see you at Strongsville, Greg, I can introduce you to him, as it is one of the shows he still does. He's getting up in age, but has a lot of knowledge. These are only 2 reasons why I place little faith in grading companies. As far as I'm concerned, the best thing grading companies offer is an overall pop report. I don't want to change anyone's mind, just add information. Everyone can draw their own conclusions and form your own opinions based on your experiences. This next comment says, I'm not sure what I think about pop control. I do know it's very difficult to find a card from the 80s or 90s that looks like it even has a shot at a 10. There's always something. Makes me wonder how other cards get 10s. Maybe the graders are actually grading the iconic cards properly and loosening the standard on less popular cards. Oh boy. So a couple more comments in there that have to be talked about with this. And it's not so much on pop control, it's just grading in general. But I'm like, okay, let's just throw this in here too. Who submits the card? Does it matter who submits it? Should it matter who submits it? Well, I don't think it should matter. It should be blind. And part of me thinks it's probably blind. But I can tell you this, when there was on-site grading back in the 90s, my dad always took his big cards and he didn't mail them and have them mail them back with grades. He would go to the show that had on-site grading and he would walk it up to the counter and say, here's my card. And he would go back the next day and he would get the card. And I do think, it's harder to give a harsh grade to a person's face than it is to send it through the mail. It's sort of like the guy who writes kind of a nasty comment to a video and he just is sitting there behind his keyboard, he's firing away this nasty comment about how I'm an idiot. And then, but he doesn't come up to me at the card show and say you're an idiot. Like, why not come and see me at the card show and tell me? It's just harder. It's easier to do it from the keyboard. Just like it's easier to mail me the harsh grade than to hand it to me in person. But there was also a thing where there were some really expensive cards, really high-end cards, where my dad would literally go to certain dealer friends that were well-known dealers and said, will you submit this card for me? Instead of my dad submitting it himself. And it was widely kind of believed at that time, that these bigger dealers, these bigger names would get sort of a different treatment. Now, was it true? I don't know. Is it happening now? I have to believe that now it's different. I believe Don's story that he just shared. I believe my dad's experience with, he would submit a card, got a bad grade, cracked it, gave it to a high-profile dealer friend who would submit it and it would get a better grade. I believe both of those things happened, but I have to believe that has changed by now. In fact, I would be willing to bet money that has changed now. And even some of the higher profile names in the hobby now, like the Jeff Wilsons, right? Whether you like or don't like Jeff Wilson, beside the point. But, I've seen Jeff Wilson submit some cards that he thought had chances at like 10s and they got like 7s and 8s. So I don't think he's getting preferential treatment. You guys tell me. I mean, I watch some stuff. You all watch stuff. Are some people getting preferential treatment? And do you have any evidence for that, or does it just feel that way? So where do I stand on all of this? I don't think there's a list at PSA, don't give 10s to these cards. I do think, because the PSA president said so himself, that a big, expensive card that may be a 10 is going to have more eyes look at it because they want to make sure it's a 10 because of the difference in value. I do think that. And I do think that there was a time where who submitted a card maybe had some influence. I don't personally think that is happening now. I think it's all blind. I think it's like a double blind sample now. I think. I don't know. You guys tell me again. I don't know. I think it's interesting. I'll continue to talk about all this stuff. You guys tell me what you think about these thoughts. You guys tell me if I'm crazy, if I'm not crazy. And heck, if you think I'm crazy and you see me at a show, tell me I'm crazy there too. It's all good. My question for this week, for all of you, is this. 2024 is winding down. So my question is, what is your New Year's resolution for your sports card collecting? What are you going to do differently? What is going to be different in 2025 than 2024? You're going to buy different things. You're going to buy more. You're going to buy less. You're going to buy older. You're going to buy newer. There's not a right way to do this hobby. There's just a lot of different ways. And that's what makes it fun. Again, if we were all 49er fans, that would be cool. But it's not as cool as when some of us are 49er fans and some of us are Cowboy fans and we play. Makes it more interesting. And so that's my question for this week. What are you going to do differently next year? What are your goal changes for this year? How are you going to start fresh? What's the mindset? What's the focus? I'll look forward to sharing those. And I think it's something that's good to do. Set goals, refocus, reflect, think about changes that you can make to improve yourself, improve whatever it is that you're doing. I look forward to sharing those next week. And thanks for watching.